The first time Rachel walked into the Golden Terrace restaurant, she had no idea she was about to serve the most feared man in Riverside. Nobody had warned her. Nobody had pulled her aside to explain the rules. She was just the new girl, fresh from Seattle, trying to make rent while figuring out what to do with her life. It was a Tuesday evening, and the restaurant hummed with the usual dinner crowd. Soft classical music played in the background, silverware clinked against expensive china, and well-dressed people spoke in hushed tones over their meals. Rachel tied her apron, tucked a stray piece of blonde hair behind her ear, and grabbed her notepad. The manager, Mr. Peterson, approached her with an uncomfortable expression. He was a nervous man on good days, always adjusting his tie and clearing his throat, but right now he looked like he'd swallowed something bitter. "Table 7, he said quietly, not quite meeting her eyes. "VIP guest. Just arrived." Rachel glanced across the dining room. Table 7 sat in the corner by the window, the best spot in the house. A man in his early 60s had just settled into his chair. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her car, and his salt and pepper hair was styled perfectly. Even from across the room, something about him commanded attention. "Got it," Rachel said, picking up a water pitcher. "Simple enough." Mr. Peterson grabbed her arm gently. "Rachel, listen. This guest is very particular, very important. If he asks for something, you bring it immediately. Don't chat. Don't make suggestions. Just do exactly what he says." Rachel frowned. She'd worked in restaurants since college. Difficult customers weren't new to her. "Sure, no problem." As she approached table 7, she noticed something strange. The tables nearby had gone quieter. People were glancing over, then quickly looking away. A couple at table 6 actually got up and moved to the other side of the restaurant. The man didn't look up when Rachel arrived. He was studying the menu like it contained the secrets of the universe, his dark eyes scanning each line with intense focus. "Good evening, sir. Can I start you off with something to drink?" He raised one finger. Not a word, just that single finger held up in the air. Rachel stood there, unsure what that meant. Wait, 1 drink? 1 minute? 30 seconds passed, a minute. Rachel's feet started to hurt in her new work shoes, but she didn't move. Finally, the man closed his menu with a decisive snap. "The water in this glass," he said, his voice smooth but cold, "has been sitting here for at least 3 minutes. It's no longer properly chilled." "Replace it," Rachel blinked. The water looked fine to her. Still had condensation on the glass, but she nodded. "Of course, sir. Right away." She returned with fresh water, poured from a pitcher she'd just taken from the ice bath. The man didn't thank her. He didn't even acknowledge her presence. "I'll have the salmon. Not the Tuesday special, the Atlantic salmon. Grilled. Not pan-seared. Regardless of how your chef prefers to prepare it. Lemon on the side, not on the fish. Asparagus steamed for exactly 4 minutes. No butter, no oil. If there's even a hint of grease on that plate, I'll send it back." Rachel wrote quickly, her shorthand getting a workout. "Yes, sir." "And to start? Did I mention an appetizer?" "No, sir." "My apologies. Then why would you ask?" Rachel felt her cheeks warm, but she kept her voice steady. "Would you like a few more minutes? I've been coming to this establishment for 8 years. I know the menu better than you do. Bring me the salmon. 22 minutes from now. Not 20, not 25, 22. Rachel nodded and headed to the kitchen, her mind racing. She'd dealt with demanding customers before, but this was something else. This was performance art. In the kitchen, she handed the order to the chef, who took one look at table number and groaned. "Him again. Every Tuesday like clockwork. Last week he sent back 3 plates because the garnish wasn't aligned properly. Who is he?" Rachel asked. The chef, a burly man named Tony, who'd worked in Riverside for 20 years, lowered his voice. "That's Vincent Harrington. Owns half the commercial real estate in town. You know the building your apartment's in? Probably his. The strip mall on 4th Street? His, the old movie theater they tore down last year? He bought it, evicted the owners, and built luxury condos." Rachel glanced back through the kitchen window. Vincent sat perfectly still. Not checking his phone, not looking around, just waiting with the patience of a man who knew the world would bend to accommodate him. "People hate him," Tony continued, plating another order, "but they're terrified to say anything. He's ruined lives. Destroyed businesses. There's a family, the Robinsons, owned a hardware store downtown for 3 generations. Vincent foreclosed on them 5 years ago over some debt they couldn't pay. Bought the building for nothing and turned it into a boutique that sells candles for $50 each." Rachel's stomach tightened. She'd grown up in a small town where everyone knew everyone. The idea of someone deliberately destroying family businesses made her angry, but something didn't add up. As she watched Vincent through the window, she noticed things the other servers seemed to miss. His hands, for instance. They had a slight tremor when he reached for his water glass, and his eyes kept darting toward the entrance every time the door opened, like he was expecting someone, or afraid someone might arrive. 22 minutes later, Rachel delivered the salmon. She'd watched the kitchen timer herself, making sure it was exact. The plate looked perfect. The fish was grilled to golden perfection, the asparagus bright green and precisely arranged. Vincent cut into the salmon, examined it, took one bite. Chewed slowly, swallowed. Rachel held her breath. "Acceptable," he said finally. That was it. No thank you. No, this is good. Just acceptable. Rachel refilled his water and stepped back, giving him space. From her service station, she continued watching him. And the more she watched, the more curious she became. Because Vincent Harrington, the man everyone feared, looked like the loneliest person in the restaurant. Nobody approached his table. Nobody stopped to say hello. When other diners recognized him, they actively avoided making eye contact. He ate his expensive meal in complete isolation, surrounded by people but utterly alone. Then something interesting happened. A couple walked in with two young kids, probably 6 and 8 years old. They were dressed nicely but not expensively. The father kept glancing at the prices on the menu with barely concealed anxiety. This was clearly a special occasion for them, and probably stretching their budget. The younger child, a little girl with pigtails, was excited and loud. "Can I get dessert, Daddy?" They have chocolate cake?" "We'll see, sweetie," the father said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. Mr. Peterson seated them at table 12, not far from Vincent. Throughout their meal, the little girl's enthusiasm never dimmed. She knocked over her water glass and her mother caught it just in time. She dropped her fork with a loud clang. She asked 1,000 questions about everything. Rachel noticed Vincent watching them. His expression was hard to read, but it wasn't annoyed. If anything, it looked almost wistful. When the family finished their meal, the father asked for the check with the air of a man preparing for bad news. Mr. Peterson brought it over, then blinked in confusion. "Sir, there must be some mistake. The check shows everything's been paid for, including desserts for the children." "What? That's impossible." "We didn't. It says here it was handled by another guest. An anonymous patron." The mother's eyes filled with tears. "Oh my God, really?" Rachel glanced at Vincent. He was signing his own check, his face completely neutral, acting like nothing had happened. But she'd seen him make a subtle gesture to Mr. Peterson earlier. One she'd thought was just about his own bill. The man everyone feared had just paid for that family's entire dinner. Anonymously. Rachel approached Vincent's table as he prepared to leave. "Your change, sir." "Keep it," he said, standing. He'd left $200 on a $60 check. As he passed the family's table on his way out, the little girl smiled up at him. "Hi, mister." Vincent paused. For just a moment, his rigid expression softened. "Hello, enjoy your dessert." Then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a soft chime. Rachel stood there, her mind churning. Nothing about this made sense. The man who allegedly destroyed businesses and ruined families had just anonymously paid for a working-class family's dinner and left a massive tip. The man who demanded perfection and treated servers like servants had responded to a child's greeting with genuine warmth. Mr. Peterson appeared at her elbow. "You survived your first night with Vincent Harrington. How do you feel?" "Confused," Rachel admitted. "That's the right response. He's a complicated man, brilliant, ruthless, and completely impossible to understand. My advice, just follow the rules, don't ask questions, and count your tips. He comes every Tuesday at 7. You'll get used to it." But Rachel wasn't sure she wanted to get used to it. Something was wrong with this picture. The whole town had painted Vincent Harrington as a villain. But villains didn't anonymously help struggling families. Villains didn't get sad watching children laugh. Over the next few weeks, Rachel kept serving table 7 every Tuesday. Vincent never varied his routine. Same time, same table, same impossible standards. He sent back food for reasons that seemed almost absurd. Too much garnish, wrong shade of grill marks, vegetables cut at the wrong angle. And yet, Rachel noticed other things. The way he left enormous tips but always insisted on anonymity. The way he contributed to the restaurant's charity jar that helped local families with medical bills and emergency expenses. Once she saw him slip an envelope into the jar. Later, when Mr. Peterson counted the donations, there was a check for $10,000 inside. Rachel's grandmother, who'd lived in Riverside for 40 years, had opinions about everything. When Rachel mentioned Vincent over Sunday dinner, her grandmother's expression changed. "That man carries more weight than anyone knows," Grandma Helen said quietly. "People in this town love having someone to blame. Vincent makes it easy." "What do you mean?" "I knew his mother, Margaret. She cleaned houses for the wealthy families here, including the Thorntons. She died suddenly 20 years ago. Heart attack, they said. But Margaret was healthy as a horse. And she'd been talking about something she'd discovered. Something about David Thornton's bank." Rachel leaned forward. "What kind of something?" "She never got to tell anyone. Died 3 days after mentioning it to me. And Vincent, he changed after that. He'd been in college, studying business, planning to help his mother retire early. After she died, he came back to Riverside and became ruthless. Started buying properties, foreclosing on businesses, making enemies. It was like he became a different person overnight. Why would losing his mother make him mean? Maybe it didn't make him mean," Grandma Helen said thoughtfully. "Maybe it made him something else. Something people mistook for mean because they didn't look close enough." On the 6th Tuesday, everything changed. Vincent arrived for his usual reservation, but he wasn't alone. With him was David Thornton, the president of Riverside Bank and the town's most respected philanthropist. Thornton was everything Vincent wasn't: warm, friendly, beloved by everyone. "Vincent, my friend." Thornton's voice boomed across the restaurant. "Thank you for dinner. You know you're too generous." Vincent's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course, David." As Rachel took their order, she watched the dynamic between them. Thornton touched Vincent's shoulder frequently, patted his hand, spoke to him with casual affection. But Vincent never relaxed. If anything, he seemed to retreat into himself. "We do so much good for this town, don't we?" Thornton said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "Though I'd say my charitable foundation serves the community's interests, while Vincent here has a more personal approach to business." The nearby diners chuckled nervously. Vincent's smile looked painted on. Rachel refilled their water glasses and heard Thornton whisper something to Vincent. She couldn't make out the words, but she saw Vincent's reaction. His face went pale, his hands gripped the table edge, and for a moment he looked genuinely afraid. David Thornton, beloved philanthropist, had just threatened Vincent Harrington. Rachel was sure of it, and suddenly she understood. Whatever was happening in Riverside, whatever truth lay beneath the surface, Vincent wasn't the villain everyone thought he was. He was scared, he was controlled, and he'd been playing a role for 20 years. Rachel made a decision then. She didn't know how yet, but she was going to find out the truth. Because if there was one thing her father had taught her before he died, it was this: the people everyone fears often aren't the people everyone should fear. The real monsters, he'd said, are usually the ones wearing smiles. Rachel couldn't stop thinking about what she'd witnessed. That look on Vincent's face when David Thornton whispered to him, it wasn't anger or annoyance, it was pure fear. And fear didn't make sense for a man who supposedly controlled half the town. The next morning, Rachel found herself at the Riverside Public Library. It was one of those old buildings with high ceilings and the smell of aged paper that made you want to whisper even when no one was around. She'd always been curious by nature, a trait her father used to call both her greatest strength and biggest weakness. "Can I help you find something?" The librarian, Mrs. Chen, looked up from her desk with a friendly smile. "I'm looking for old newspapers, stories about local businesses, maybe from 5 or 6 years ago." Mrs. Chen's smile faded slightly. That was a difficult time for Riverside. A lot of good people lost everything. "Are you researching something specific?" "Just trying to understand the town's history. I'm new here." The librarian studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Microfiche machine is in the back. Riverside Chronicle archives go back 30 years. Help yourself." Rachel spent 3 hours scrolling through old newspapers. The stories painted a grim picture. In the span of 6 months, 5 family-owned businesses had been foreclosed on. The Robinson hardware store, owned by the same family since 1952. Chen's Pharmacy, a community staple for decades. The Miller family bakery. Riverside Books, Garcia's Auto Repair. Every article blamed Vincent Harrington. The headlines were brutal. Local millionaire destroys another family business. Harrington's greed claims fifth victim. No mercy. Real estate mogul forecloses on 70-year-old business. But as Rachel dug deeper, she noticed something odd. Each business had originally borrowed money from Riverside Bank, David Thornton's bank. The loans had started small and reasonable, but then, according to the fine print in the legal notices, the debts had been sold to something called Riverside Capital Holdings LLC. Rachel had no idea what that meant, but it seemed important. She took photos of every relevant page with her phone. That evening, she called her college roommate Jennifer, who worked as a paralegal in Seattle. "Hey, can I ask you something about business stuff? What does it mean when a bank sells a debt to an LLC?" Jennifer's voice came through with traffic noise in the background. "Usually means the bank wants the debt off their books. They sell it to a collection company or investment firm, sometimes for pennies on the dollar. The new owner then tries to collect the full amount. It's legal but kind of predatory. Why? Just curious about something I read. Thanks." After hanging up, Rachel sat on her apartment's tiny balcony, watching the sunset over Riverside. If the bank sold the debts and then this LLC demanded immediate payment, the businesses would have no choice but to default. And who would benefit? Whoever owned the LLC could force a foreclosure and buy the properties cheap. Everyone assumed Vincent owned that LLC. But what if he didn't? Tuesday came again, and Rachel prepared herself for Vincent's arrival. She decided to pay closer attention to everything, to look for clues everyone else had missed. Vincent arrived exactly at 7, as always. But tonight something was different. His hands shook more than usual when he reached for his water glass. He ordered his meal with the same precision, but his voice lacked its usual cold confidence. Halfway through his salmon, David Thornton walked in. He wasn't expected, hadn't made a reservation, but Mr. Peterson nearly tripped over himself finding him a table. Naturally, he was seated near Vincent. "Vincent!" What a coincidence. Thornton's voice boomed across the restaurant. "Mind if I join you?" It wasn't a question. Thornton was already moving toward Vincent's table, his smile wide and friendly. To everyone watching, it looked like two old friends meeting by chance. Rachel saw Vincent's fork pause midway to his mouth, saw the way his shoulders tensed. "Of course, David, please." As Rachel brought Thornton his menu, she positioned herself where she could hear their conversation while appearing to organize silverware at a nearby service station. "I heard something interesting today," Thornton said, his voice still friendly but with an edge underneath. "A rumor that you've been asking questions at the county clerk's office, looking at old property records. That's a curious hobby for someone who already knows everything about real estate in this town." Vincent cut his salmon with careful precision. "I like to stay informed." "Of course you do. But there's informed and then there's nosy. You understand the difference, don't you?" "I understand many things, David." Thornton leaned closer and his voice dropped to a whisper. Rachel had to strain to hear. "Your mother understood things too. Look where that got her." Vincent's knife clattered against his plate. For a moment, Rachel thought he might actually lose his composure. But then he took a slow breath, picked up his knife, and continued eating like nothing had happened. "I'm just concerned about you, old friend," Thornton continued in his normal, jovial voice. "You seem stressed lately. Maybe you should take a vacation. Clear your head. Remember what's important." "I remember everything that's important," Vincent said quietly. Thornton patted Vincent's shoulder in what looked like affection, but felt like a threat. "Good, I'd hate for you to forget, especially with the town's anniversary celebration coming up. Big gala planned. I'm receiving the Humanitarian of the Year award again. 5th time. Can you believe it? You'll be there, of course, at my table. We'll celebrate together." "Of course," Vincent said, his voice hollow. After Thornton left, Vincent sat alone for a long time. He didn't finish his meal. He just stared at his plate, and Rachel saw something she'd never seen before: defeat in his eyes. When she brought his check, she did something impulsive. As she set it down, she quietly said, "Are you okay, sir?" Vincent looked up at her like he'd forgotten she existed. For a moment, his mask slipped, and she saw a tired, scared man who'd been carrying something heavy for far too long. "Why would you ask me that? You seem upset." "I just wanted to make sure everything was all right with your meal." Vincent studied her face, and Rachel had the uncomfortable feeling he was seeing past all her own careful walls. What's your name? Rachel. How long have you worked here, Rachel? About 6 weeks. And in those 6 weeks, what have you heard about me? Rachel hesitated. Honesty felt dangerous, but lying felt worse. That you're not a very nice person. That you've hurt a lot of people in this town. Vincent nodded slowly. And do you believe that? I don't know what I believe yet. But I don't think people are usually just one thing. Everyone's more complicated than they seem. For the first time since Rachel had met him, Vincent almost smiled. It didn't quite reach his face, but something in his eyes softened. That's a wise observation for someone so young. Be careful with that wisdom. Sometimes seeing too clearly can be dangerous. He left his usual enormous tip and walked out. Rachel stood there, her heart pounding. That had felt like a warning. Or maybe a plea for help. She couldn't tell which. That night, Rachel couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Vincent's mother, Margaret. About how she died right before revealing something important. About how Thornton had just casually mentioned her death as if it was a threat. At 2 a.m, she gave up on sleep and opened her laptop. She started searching public records online. Anything she could access without special permissions. Property transfers, business licenses, incorporation documents. Riverside Capital Holdings, LLC had been incorporated 7 years ago. The registered agent was a law firm in the state capital, which told her nothing. But the incorporation date was interesting. It was 3 months before the first business foreclosure. She kept digging. The businesses that had been foreclosed on, where were they now? She pulled up a map and marked each location. Robinson Hardware was now an upscale kitchen supply store. Chen's Pharmacy was a boutique selling handmade jewelry. Miller's Bakery was an art gallery, all expensive. All catering to wealthy tourists rather than locals. All part of what some people called the gentrification of downtown Riverside. But who actually owned these new businesses? Rachel searched business licenses and found something shocking. Each new business was owned by a different person, but they all had the same business address for their corporate filings. An office building on Riverside Avenue. She looked up the building's owner. It belonged to Vincent Harrington, so Vincent did own the properties. But wait. Rachel pulled up the property transfer records more carefully. Vincent had bought the buildings, yes, but he'd bought them from Riverside Capital Holdings, LLC. He wasn't the one who'd foreclosed on the original owners. He'd purchased the properties after they'd already been seized, and according to the dates, he'd paid market value for them, maybe even more. That didn't make sense. If Vincent had been the villain, why would he pay full price for properties he'd already forced into foreclosure? He could have just kept them. Rachel's phone buzzed with a text from her grandmother. Can't sleep either? Come over for tea. 20 minutes later, Rachel sat in Grandma Helen's warm kitchen, hands wrapped around a mug of chamomile tea. Her grandmother had always been a night owl, and some of Rachel's best memories were these late-night talks. You're thinking about Vincent Harrington, Grandma Helen said. It wasn't a question, how did you know? You have that look your father used to get when he was working on a difficult case. Like you're trying to solve a puzzle that doesn't want to be solved. Rachel's father had been a detective before he died. Cancer had taken him 5 years ago, but his lessons about looking beyond the obvious had stayed with her. Tell me more about Vincent's mother, Rachel said. You said she discovered something about David Thornton? Grandma Helen settled into her chair with a sigh. Margaret Harrington was my friend. We volunteered together at the community center, served on the church committee. She was kind, hardworking, and she loved her son more than anything. Vincent was her whole world. What happened? She cleaned houses for extra money. One of her clients was David Thornton. She'd been cleaning his home office for years, very trustworthy, never touched anything she shouldn't. But one day she came to me upset, said she'd seen something she wasn't supposed to see, documents about loans and foreclosures. She said Thornton was deliberately destroying businesses. Did she go to the police? She was going to. She had an appointment with the police chief for the following Monday. But that Friday she had a heart attack at home. Died instantly, they said. She was 52 years old and healthy. That's not possible. Healthy 52-year-olds don't just drop dead. That's what I thought. But the coroner ruled it natural causes. No autopsy, no investigation. David Thornton even paid for her funeral. Called it a gesture of respect for a valued employee. Everyone thought it was generous. Rachel felt cold despite the warm tea. What about Vincent? What did he think? Vincent came back from college for the funeral. He was different afterward. Angry, cold-driven. He finished his degree in record time, then came back to Riverside and started buying properties aggressively. People thought grief had made him greedy, but I always wondered if there was more to it. Like what? Grandma Helen looked at Rachel with sad, knowing eyes. Like maybe he was trying to protect her memory, or trying to finish what she started, or maybe someone had something on him, something that forced him to play a role he never wanted. Rachel drove home as the sun started to rise, her mind racing. She was starting to see the outline of a story everyone had gotten wrong. Vincent wasn't the villain. He was a victim, or maybe a prisoner, trapped by something that had happened 20 years ago. But why would he accept that? Why not fight back? Unless Thornton had leverage, something so powerful that Vincent had spent 2 decades playing the bad guy to protect it. As she pulled into her apartment parking lot, Rachel made a decision. She was going to find out the truth, whatever it took. Because if Vincent had been protecting his mother's memory all these years while everyone hated him, then someone needed to set the record straight. And if David Thornton was really the villain everyone thought Vincent was, then the whole town deserved to know. Rachel had no idea how dangerous that knowledge would turn out to be. But she was about to find out. Rachel spent the next week digging deeper but carefully. She couldn't let anyone know what she was investigating, especially not David Thornton. During her shifts at the Golden Terrace, she smiled and served tables like nothing had changed. But every spare moment she was piecing together a puzzle that had been hidden for 20 years. The breakthrough came from an unexpected place. Mrs. Chen, the librarian, stopped Rachel as she was leaving the library one afternoon. "You've been spending a lot of time in our archives," she said quietly. "Looking at stories about my family's pharmacy." Rachel froze. She'd forgotten that Mrs. Chen shared the same last name as the pharmacy that had been foreclosed on. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to pry into personal matters." "My husband's parents owned that pharmacy," Mrs. Chen said. "We lost it 6 years ago. Everyone blamed Vincent Harrington. My in-laws never recovered from the shame. My father-in-law died 2 years later. Heartbroken, literally." "I'm so sorry." Mrs. Chen glanced around the empty library, then gestured for Rachel to follow her to a back room. Inside were boxes of donated books and old records waiting to be cataloged. She pulled out a worn folder from beneath a stack of encyclopedias. "These are my father-in-law's papers. Documents from when we lost the pharmacy. I kept them because something never felt right about what happened, but I didn't know what to do with them. Maybe you'll understand them better than I did." Rachel opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were loan documents, letters, and bank statements. The pharmacy had borrowed $50,000 from Riverside Bank to renovate and update their inventory. Standard business loan, reasonable interest rate. But then, 8 months later, the debt had been sold to Riverside Capital Holdings. And suddenly the full amount was due immediately. No warning, no negotiation period, just a demand for $50,000 in 30 days or face foreclosure. "We tried to talk to the bank," Mrs. Chen said, "but David Thornton said his hands were tied once the debt was sold. He even seemed sympathetic, offered to help us find a buyer for the property to avoid foreclosure. We thought he was being kind. But he wasn't," Rachel said, her stomach sinking. "The only buyer who came forward was Vincent Harrington. He offered us half what the property was worth. We had no choice. We took it or lost everything. Then 3 months later, we found out Vincent had bought the building from Riverside Capital Holdings for twice what he'd paid us. He made $100,000 off our misery." Rachel stared at the documents, her mind racing. "Can I make copies of these?" "Take the originals. I don't want them anymore. They just remind me of what we lost." That night, Rachel spread everything across her apartment floor. The Chen family documents, her notes from the newspaper archives, property records she'd printed. She made The pattern was clear now. Riverside Bank would loan money to struggling local businesses. Then right when those businesses were most vulnerable, the debts would be sold to Riverside Capital Holdings. The LLC would demand immediate payment. The businesses would fail, and Vincent Harrington would swoop in to buy the properties, but something still didn't make sense. If Vincent was working with Riverside Capital Holdings, why would he pay them more than market value for the properties? That's not how a scheme works. You don't pay your partner extra money, unless Vincent wasn't the partner, unless he was trying to compensate the families quietly, knowing they'd been cheated by someone else. Rachel pulled up the property records again. After Vincent bought each building, what happened to the original business owners? She started making calls, tracking people down through social media and phone directories. It took 3 days, but she finally reached Daniel Robinson, whose family had lost their hardware store. He was living in Arizona now, working for a large chain hardware store. "I don't like talking about what happened in Riverside," he said when Rachel explained why she was calling. "That's a painful chapter of my life." "I understand. But can I ask you one question? After you lost the store, did you receive any money beyond what Vincent Harrington paid for the building?" There was a long silence. "How do you know about that?" Rachel's heart jumped. "So you did receive money?" "About 6 months after we moved away, I got a letter from a law firm. Said I was entitled to compensation from a legal settlement. Anonymous plaintiff, confidential terms. They sent me a check for $200,000. I thought it was a mistake at first, but the lawyers assured me it was legitimate." "Did the letter say who the plaintiff was?" "No. And I was told if I asked questions or tried to find out, I'd have to return the money. So I didn't ask. That money let me start over, put my kids through college. I wasn't going to risk losing it." After hanging up, Rachel sat in stunned silence. She called the other families one by one. The Millers, who'd lost their bakery, the Garcia family and their auto repair shop. Every single one had received a large anonymous settlement within a year of losing their business. Vincent hadn't just bought the properties. He'd been secretly compensating the families for their losses, far more than they'd lost. He'd been making them whole while letting everyone think he was the villain. But why? Why accept being hated when he was actually helping people? The answer had to be connected to his mother, to whatever leverage David Thornton held over him. Tuesday came around again and Rachel was ready. She'd spent days planning exactly what she was going to do, knowing it was risky but feeling like she had no choice. Vincent arrived at his usual time. Rachel served him with her normal efficiency, but this time she'd written something on his receipt. Just 3 words, "I know everything." She watched his face as he read it. For a moment, nothing. Then his eyes lifted to meet hers and she saw shock, fear, and something else. Hope, maybe? He paid his bill and left, but he'd written something on the receipt too. Rachel's hand shook as she read it. "Parking lot. 10 minutes. Come alone." Mr. Peterson was watching her strangely. "Everything okay, Rachel?" "Fine, just need some air." "Can I take my break?" Outside, the evening air was cool and smelled like rain. Rachel found Vincent standing by his car, a sleek black Mercedes that probably cost more than her yearly salary. He looked older in the parking lot lights, more tired. "What do you think you know?" His voice was quiet, not threatening, just exhausted. "I know about the settlements, about how you've been paying the families you supposedly destroyed. I know about Riverside Capital Holdings, and how the debts were sold right before the foreclosures. I know your mother found something before she died, something about David Thornton." Vincent closed his eyes. "You're going to get yourself killed." "Is that what happened to your mother?" "Did Thornton kill her?" "I can't prove it. But yes, I believe he did. She found evidence that he was running a scheme through his bank, lending money to vulnerable businesses, then using a shell company to force foreclosures. He'd buy the properties through another shell company, then flip them for enormous profits. My mother was going to expose him. So why didn't you? After she died, why didn't you go to the police with what she knew?" Vincent laughed, but it was bitter and painful. "Because Thornton was smart. After my mother died, he came to me, showed me forged documents that made it look like my mother was his accomplice, bank records with her signature, deposit slips showing money going into an account in her name. All fake but professionally done. He said if I caused problems, he'd destroy her reputation, make everyone think she was a criminal." Rachel felt sick. "So you made a deal." He wanted someone to be the public face of the foreclosures, someone people could blame so they wouldn't look at him. "I agreed to buy the properties and take the heat if he'd leave my mother's memory alone. I've spent 20 years being hated so that people would remember her as a good woman instead of a thief. But you've been helping the family secretly. It was the only way I could live with myself. I couldn't save their businesses, but I could make sure they didn't lose everything. Thornton doesn't know about the settlements. I've been very careful. Why are you telling me this?" Vincent looked at her with those tired eyes. "Because for 20 years no one has questioned the story. No one looked close enough to see the truth. But you did, and I'm so tired of carrying this alone. But Rachel, you need to stop digging. Thornton is dangerous. He's killed before and he'll kill again to protect himself. Do you have proof?" The evidence your mother found. She told me she'd hidden it somewhere safe. A safety deposit box, she said, but she died before telling me where or giving me the key. I've been looking for 20 years. Every property she ever lived in. Every place she might have hidden something, nothing. Rachel's mind was working fast. What about her personal effects? Things that were given to you after she died? Just some clothes, a few pieces of jewelry, photo albums. I've been through everything 100 times. What about a Bible? Did your mother have a Bible? Vincent went very still. She had her grandmother's Bible, old family heirloom. Why? My grandmother always said that godly women keep their most precious things in their Bibles. My great-grandmother hid money in hers. Old ladies do that. I have her Bible. It's in a box at home. I couldn't bring myself to open it after she died. Too painful. Maybe it's time, Rachel said gently. Vincent stared at her for a long moment. Why are you doing this? Why do you care? Rachel thought about her father, about how he'd always told her to stand up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves, about how the world needed people who asked questions even when it was easier to stay quiet, because it's the right thing to do, and because I don't think you should have to be the villain in a story where you're actually the hero. Vincent's eyes grew wet and he looked away quickly. Don't call me a hero. Heroes don't hide for 20 years. Heroes do whatever they have to do to protect the people they love, even if it means being misunderstood. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Vincent pulled out his phone. Give me your number. If I find anything in that Bible, I'll call you. But Rachel, promise me something. If this gets dangerous, if Thornton finds out what you know, you run. You leave Riverside and don't look back. My mother's sacrifice can't be for nothing. But I won't have another death on my conscience. I promise, Rachel lied. She had no intention of running. After Vincent left, Rachel sat in her car for a long time. She was holding pieces of a puzzle that could destroy David Thornton and vindicate Vincent. But she was also playing a dangerous game with a man who'd possibly committed murder to protect his secrets. Her phone buzzed. A text from Vincent. Found it. Small key taped inside the back cover. Safety deposit box number written in invisible ink. Only visible under UV light. She was brilliant. Meeting you tomorrow to decide next steps. Rachel smiled in the darkness. Margaret Harrington had been protecting her son even after death, hiding the truth where only someone who truly loved her would think to look. Tomorrow they'd open that safety deposit box. Tomorrow they'd see what Margaret had found 20 years ago. And tomorrow, Rachel suspected, would be the beginning of the end for David Thornton's perfect facade. But tonight, Rachel drove home with her doors locked and her eyes checking the rearview mirror. Because she'd learned something important from her father's detective work. The closer you get to the truth, the more dangerous things become, and Rachel was very close to the truth now. Rachel barely slept that night. Every sound in her apartment building made her jump. Every car passing outside made her peek through the curtains. She kept thinking about Margaret Harrington, about how a woman who'd just been trying to do the right thing had ended up dead. At 7 a.m, her phone rang. Vincent's voice was tight with tension. The bank opens at 9. Meet me at the coffee shop on 3rd Street at 8:30. Don't tell anyone where you're going. Rachel dressed quickly, her hands shaking as she buttoned her jacket. She left a note for her grandmother on the kitchen counter just in case. It said, "If anything happens to me, David Thornton knows why. Evidence is in my laptop. Password is Dad's badge number." The coffee shop was nearly empty when Rachel arrived. Vincent sat in the back corner, his expensive suit looking out of place in the casual setting. He had a worn leather Bible on the table in front of him, and even from across the room Rachel could see his hands trembling. She slid into the seat across from him. "Did you sleep at all?" "No, I spent all night reading her notes." She wrote in the margins in tiny handwriting, dates, amounts, names. She documented everything she saw. Vincent's voice cracked. She was so brave. And I let her memory be buried for 20 years because I was scared. You were protecting her. That's not the same as being scared, isn't it? Vincent pushed the Bible across the table. Look at the last page she wrote on. Rachel opened the Bible carefully. The paper was thin and delicate, marked with Margaret's neat handwriting. The final note, dated 3 days before her death, read, "If you're reading this, Vincent, it means something happened to me. I'm not naive. I know the risk I'm taking. But some things are more important than safety. This town deserves the truth. You deserve a future not built on someone else's corruption." The safety deposit box at First National Bank, Box 247, Has everything. The key is with this Bible. Be brave, my son. Be braver than I was. Don't let fear make you small. Rachel felt tears prick her eyes. She knew. She knew what might happen, and she did it anyway, while I've spent 20 years hiding. Vincent closed the Bible gently, reverently. No more. Today we end this. They walked to First National Bank together, neither speaking much. The morning was bright and clear, birds singing in the trees like it was just another normal day. Rachel wondered if Margaret had walked these same streets 20 years ago, knowing she might not have much time left. Inside the bank, everything was polished marble and brass fixtures, the kind of place that whispered about money and permanence. A young woman at the desk smiled at them professionally. "We need to access a safety deposit box," Vincent said, his voice steady now. "Box 247, the woman typed on her computer, then frowned slightly. "That box is registered to Margaret Harrington. Are you an authorized accessor? I'm her son. She passed away 20 years ago. I'm sorry for your loss. Do you have the death certificate and proof of estate settlement?" Vincent pulled out a folder he'd brought. Rachel realized he'd been preparing for this moment, probably for years. The woman reviewed the documents, made some copies, and finally nodded. "Everything appears to be in order. Do you have the key?" Vincent placed the small key on the counter. It looked so ordinary, so insignificant. Hard to believe something so small had been hiding the truth for 2 decades. They followed the woman into the vault, a room lined with small metal doors. She used her master key along with Vincent's key to open box 247, then pulled out a long metal container and set it on the table in the private viewing room. "Take your time," she said, leaving them alone. Vincent stared at the box like it might explode. Rachel reached over and squeezed his hand. "Your mother wanted you to have this. She trusted you to know what to do with it." He opened the lid slowly. Inside were 3 manila envelopes and a cassette tape. Vincent picked up the tape first, his expression confused. "I don't even know where we'd find a cassette player anymore." "The library has one. In their media archive," Rachel said. "What's in the envelopes?" The first envelope contained photographs, bank documents, loan applications, internal memos, all showing David Thornton's signature authorizing loans to businesses he knew were struggling. But more damning were the memos to his staff. "Approve this loan. Will be profitable for restructuring later. And target for Q3. Acquisition strategy." The second envelope had financial records showing money flowing from Riverside Capital Holdings into offshore accounts, and one account number appeared over and over, linked to property in the Cayman Islands registered to David Thornton's wife. The third envelope made Rachel's blood run cold. It was a life insurance policy on Margaret Harrington, taken out 3 weeks before her death. The beneficiary wasn't Vincent. It was David Thornton, listed as her employer. The policy was for $500,000. "He insured her life," Rachel whispered. "He planned to kill her." Vincent's face had gone white. "All these years I thought maybe I was paranoid. Maybe it really was just a heart attack. But this? He murdered her for insurance money and to keep her quiet." "We need to hear what's on that tape," Rachel said. They rushed to the library, the metal box tucked under Vincent's arm. Mrs. Chen looked up in surprise when they burst through the doors. "We need to use the media room. It's an emergency." Something in Vincent's face must have convinced her not to ask questions. She led them to a small room with old audio equipment and closed the door behind them. The cassette player was ancient, covered in dust. Rachel had to try 3 times before she figured out how to make it work. Finally, the tape began to play, the sound scratchy and old. Margaret's voice came through the speakers, and Vincent's face crumpled. He'd probably forgotten what she sounded like after all these years. "My name is Margaret Harrington. Today is October 15th, and I'm recording this as insurance. David Thornton doesn't know I'm aware of his scheme, but I've been documenting it for 3 months now. He's using Riverside Bank to deliberately destroy local businesses so he can acquire their properties through a shell company. I've seen the internal memos. I've photographed the documents. I've traced the money." There was a pause, the sound of papers rustling. "But that's not all. 2 weeks ago, I overheard David on the phone in his study. I was cleaning and he didn't know I was there. He was talking about me. He said, 'The housekeeper knows too much. We need to handle it before she becomes a problem.' I knew then that I was in danger." Vincent made a sound like a wounded animal. Rachel grabbed his hand again, holding tight. "I'm going to the police on Monday. I have an appointment with Chief Morrison. If something happens to me before then, if I die suddenly, it wasn't an accident. David Thornton is dangerous. He's killed before. What? Rachel and Vincent said simultaneously. 5 years ago, there was a journalist, Thomas Webb, who was investigating corruption at Riverside Bank. He died in a car accident on Route 9. Single vehicle crash. No witnesses. They said he fell asleep at the wheel. But I found a memo in David's office from a week before the accident. It said Webb problem will be resolved. I think David had him killed too. The tape continued with Margaret detailing more evidence, more crimes. She'd been building a case that would have destroyed Thornton completely. And she'd known it might cost her life. The tape ended with, "Vincent, if you're hearing this, I'm so sorry. I never wanted to put you in danger. But I couldn't stand by and watch David destroy more families. You taught me that, my sweet boy. You always had such a strong sense of justice, even as a child. Don't let my death be for nothing. Don't let him win. I love you." The room was silent except for the sound of Vincent crying. He'd held it together through everything else, but hearing his mother's voice broke him. Rachel sat with him, not saying anything, just being there. After a while, Vincent wiped his eyes and straightened up. "We're going to the police today, right now." "Wait," Rachel said. "We should be smart about this. Thornton has been getting away with this for 20 years. He probably has connections at the local police department. Then what do you suggest?" Rachel thought fast. "The anniversary gala. You said Thornton is receiving his award there in front of the whole town. What if we exposed him publicly? No chance for him to cover it up or make it disappear. Everyone would know at once. That's in 3 days. Then we have 3 days to prepare. We need to make copies of everything. We need to secure the evidence somewhere Thornton can't get to it. And we need witnesses, lots of them." Vincent nodded slowly. "The gala's at the Golden Terrace. You'll be working that night." "Exactly. And no one pays attention to the waitstaff. I can move around, set things up. Do you have access to the audio system?" "I can get it. I'm on the committee. I'm supposed to be sitting at Thornton's table." Vincent's expression hardened. He wanted me there to parade me around, his tame villain. Proof that he's the good guy and I'm the bad one. Instead, I'll be the one who destroys him. They spent the rest of the day making plans. Rachel made multiple copies of all the evidence, storing them in different locations. One set went to her grandmother with instructions to take it to the state police if anything happened to Rachel. One set went to Vincent's lawyer with similar instructions. One set was uploaded to a secure cloud storage. That evening, Rachel's phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Rachel." It was David Thornton's voice, smooth and friendly. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." Her heart stopped. "Mr. Thornton, how did you get my number?" "Oh, I have my ways. I wanted to personally invite you to the anniversary gala. I think it would be nice to have our best waitress there for such a special occasion. You'll be paid extra, of course." Rachel's mouth was dry. "Did he know? Was this a threat?" "That's very kind of you, sir. I've been hearing interesting things about you, Rachel. People say you're very curious, always asking questions, doing research. That's admirable. But you know what they say about curiosity. It killed the cat."